Welcome to Book Club, where we have adventures in reading. Hello there, I'm John. Welcome to Book Club and welcome to this week's Adventures in Reading. This week we are looking at perhaps reading outside of our usual sphere, reading outside of our own box. Not necessarily out of our comfort zone, but outside of our box, reading things that we may not necessarily come across if we just stayed confined within our usual patterns of doing things. So I want to introduce you to two lovely writers. We're going to be looking at the story I Stand Here Ironing by Tillie Olsen, and we're going to be looking at Nii Parkes' poem Commonwealth, and Nii's poem continues our exploration of this anthology, Out of Bounds. And so over the next sort of coming months and then into next year, because we have a second year of funding, I'm going to do some featured anthologies, which hopefully will kind of take us further around the world, because we can kind of we can go a bit further that way, you know. Of course there'll be single collections too, non-fiction, essays, speeches, little routines, all sorts of stuff. So stick around for that, and do subscribe to this channel. Then you can be in touch with what we're doing, and there's a little notification bell next to the subscribe button if you're watching this on YouTube. So if you click that, you won't miss any videos at all. Let's get into this week's reading. And I'd never come across, I have to say, Tillie Olsen before. This story was recommended to me by another person running a reading round somewhere else. You know, the Royal Literary Fund is who I do this work with, and there are 25 groups like mine around the country. Mine, I've decided to kind of go down a particular avenue of kind of having a more kind of global perspective in reading. But this is, I guess, what you would call an American story. It has that very precise kind of American language, and I was quite surprised, really, because this story was actually written in 1961, and it was in a collection of linked short stories called Tell Me a Riddle, but it didn't appear in Britain until 1980, when it was published by Virago. I stand here ironing, and what you ask me moves tormented back and forth with the iron. I wish you would manage the time to come in and talk with me about your daughter. I'm sure you can help me understand her. She's a youngster who needs help, and whom I'm deeply interested in helping. Who needs help? Even if I came, what good would it do? You think because I'm her mother I have a key, or that in some way you could use me as a key? She has lived for 19 years. There is all that life that has happened outside of me, beyond me. And when is there time to remember, to sift, to weigh, to estimate, to total? I will start and there will be an interruptions, and I will have to gather it all together again, or I'll become engulfed with all I did or did not do, with what should have been and what cannot be helped. She was a beautiful baby, the first and only one of our 5 that was beautiful at birth. You do not guess how new and uneasy her tenancy in her now loveliness was. You do not know her all those years she thought she was homely, or see her poring over her baby pictures, making me tell her over and over how beautiful she had been and would be. I would tell her, and was now to the seeing eye. But the seeing eyes were few or non-existent, including mine. So, we're introduced by somebody ironing, and they've obviously received a telephone call from a school or a college or something earlier in the day, and she's mulling it over, and the story goes on to kind of explore over quite a long period in time, but actually quite short within the story. You know, it's only 3,500 words. the relationship between this mother and this child. The child is Emily, and we see kind of Emily's life kind of told through her mother's fears for her and her strivings, and really it's a story about the guilt of parenting and the guilt of motherhood, of you, no matter what you do, you don't get it right. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And I was so grateful. The whole group was so grateful for this story. It's not an easy story. It's easy to read, but it's not easy in terms of, you know, that kind of closeness and that kind of worry that we have for our children. And amazingly, Tillie Olsen was 19 when she wrote this story, and it's so far-sighted. It's obviously American, and it's written around, you know, the time of America's wars in the 60s, and there's a lot of kind of, not a lot of, but there's kind of an underlying feeling of threat and reference to some of that stuff. But it's just beautiful to enter into someone else's world, and I think every single one of us sitting around the table kind of gave pause for thought of how it was for our mothers, whether we had good childhoods or not so good childhoods or more difficult times. I found it particularly poignant because there's one piece in the middle where, without telling you details about it, but that Emily has to go into care for a little while. The child has to go into care just because there's nobody to look after her. And it just really brought me back to being, God, how old was I? You know, 11, was I 10 or 11 or something like that? Yeah, I was in primary school and upper levels of primary school, and we had to have a kind of a short period of time in care, and there's no, you know, not easy stuff to talk about really, and this kind of bravery to talk about these things, and like I say, for a 19-year-old, it was hugely insightful, I think. So the whole group loved it. We loved the language about it. We loved the not getting it rightness of it, and we love that it's about real life and ordinary things, and that's what literature is really about. We've come across this quite a few times within these videos, that you know, literature rooted in real lives is kind of, you know, a very strong way to go. It's not some weird and distant thing. So if you'd like to read that, and you'd like to read the stories that are connected to it, because there are 3 more stories in that series, then find yourself a copy of Tell Me a Riddle by Tillie Olsen. And for our poem, we went back to the Out of Bounds anthology. I actually spoke about this anthology at greater length last week, and it's actually based on a poem of mine. So in last week's video, you can find a link to it just here. I read the poem of mine that the book is based on, and kind of discussed it at more length, you know, how this book works. But I wanted to read a poem that kind of goes along with Tillie Olsen's piece, and I came across Nii Parkes' Commonwealth, which is quite a small poem, and I've had the pleasure of meeting Nii on a few occasions, and he's just a very delightful human being. And Nii has an incredible ability to paint with words, and each one of these verses has a very precise image in it, such incredible precision, like a kind of almost like a master painter, you know, like you look at some of the kind of Dutch masters of the 17th century or whatever. There's this kind of light and precision to them. Let me read you Commonwealth by Nii Parkes. Without wheels, their boy bodies are eloquent in the cool air. Tightly coiled springs that jump and whirl and oscillate effortlessly. The same way bows slip off the roofs of their mouths like clay shingles. Each move is demonstrated with familiar ease, every element of motion executed, like a locksmith decodes a knot. Then the ringing chatter settles like a dropped coin. The expectant clatter of skateboards rises, then turns to air. Flared jeans lift, then fall, as though for a second they had lungs. And the boys are mounted. The first boy's feet propel him towards idle boasts, and after graceful coasting, he launches himself, a raised flag. His flight is jerky yet hopeful, like a plea in a tongue he hasn't mastered the rolling of. So just observing some boys skateboarding, and there's obviously more experienced skateboarders, or maybe slightly older boys, teaching the younger boys how to do it, and the first boys are so graceful in their movement. I can't skateboard. And then the young boy that tries kind of, manages it, but he's kind of like this afterwards, and kind of, just about makes it kind of thing without kind of tearing his skin off or something like that, and then there's kind of this sense of relief. And there's just this kind of openness, and kind of the wealth that is common between them is not about their status or their background or their, where they come from. It's whether they put themselves out there on the skateboard, whether they kind of take their next leap, as it were, and that being kind of measured and strive for. And yet it's also that sense of wanting to belong and to kind of, be in groups and being a teenager and all that sort of thing. So it's a really delightful view of young people, and it kind of goes with Tillie Olsen's piece, because in Tillie's piece we have this sense of this young person who's kind of struggling a bit, and yet there are moments of delight, but they're very rare for her. But then she finds her talent, and something kind of moves with that. Whereas with Nii's poem, we're balanced out. We're shown kind of the beauty of humanity and grace that is within young people. I think very often young people get a very bum rap, and kind of, are mistrusted for everything. And yet, they are life's arrow moving forward, as Khalil Gibran would say. And here they are actually launching themselves forwards into life. So I hope you enjoy these two selections, and please let me know in the comments below how you get on with them. Please do subscribe to this channel. Please give this video a thumbs up, because that helps more people see it. If you feel like sharing this video with somebody else who's a bookworm like you, and you think it would be of value to them, then please do. I'm grateful anytime anybody shares some of these things or discovers some new reading for themselves. And if you have any suggestions for great stories that we could look at, poems, by people who are kind of writing outside of the box and so on, then let us know again in the comments below, and maybe we can feed some things into what we're having a look at. Take care of yourself. Have a beautiful, beautiful day. See you very soon.